How does one's personal beliefs and bias affect their ability to take direct action toward big issues? There are thousands of varieties of conflicts throughout the world, and while it may seem like tons of people are collaborating to fix things like environmental issues, issues in rights, and other big conflicts, the progress seems to be slowed down by differences in opinions, beliefs, etc. It leads to the claim that personal beliefs and bias have an overall negative effect on a person's ability to take direct action toward big national or worldwide issues. So my main lenses are religion, and I'm going to talk about Margaret Thatcher speaking out, and she's a minority in what she did, and that's kind of the environmental lens. Just for some background, these are most of the different religions in the United States, which Edward Kessler talked about, which I'll talk about in a minute. And while it may seem like Protestant is more like the biggest one, there's still a lot of differences that can lead to conflict in interaction. So as technology develops, so does people's ability to reach out and connect with others over anything and everything, including religion. And it can also cause conflict. Edward Kessler, director of the Wolf Institute and thinker in interfaith religions, discusses this in his article, Social Media and the Movement of Ideas. In the intro, he states, social media can overcome ignorant stereotypes, but although it is abused to promote prejudice. He later discusses the nature of the many people connections that are being promoted by social media, and then talks about the possible conflicts that comes with that, and the shift in dynamic from the users being able to have power to put out whatever they want instead of just the makers of whatever the website is. So that means that sometimes being faithful in public or being religious in public can lead to conflicts just because of the nature, and that can overall take a step back in progress towards things like just interacting with other people besides ones that you know are the same as you. So for real world context, in 2008, a California ballot proposed the opposition of same-sex marriage, but it was ultimately ruled unconstitutional. It was unsuccessful because it failed to separate state and religion in the government, since the basis of the argument was that only marriage between a man and a woman was valid or recognized in California. So with the religion, it may seem like it mainly pertains to things like the social media stuff, but when it comes to the government, it's said in the Constitution that state and religion must be separated, but with things like marriage laws, that can sometimes become a blurred line, and this case actually went to the Supreme Court and ended up being ruled unconstitutional because it failed to separate them. So next I'm going to talk about Margaret Thatcher, and mostly about how she was a minority, but she was a very successful woman. She was the United Kingdom's first female prime minister, and she was actually the longest prime minister in power. And she graduated from Oxford University with a degree in chemistry. She sent soldiers to the Falkland Islands while she was in power to maintain Britain's sovereignty over them, and she won. And before that, she wasn't really respected as much in her community or even just by people overall. But then once she won that war, she gained a lot of respect. But she was still a minority because she was one of the very few women in power. So her overall idea in her speech was that there was environmental change happening and climate change and everything like that. And she was the first to really bring it up in that time. And so it was like very, I don't know, it just wasn't really talked about until she brought it up. And so the people in the UN didn't really, like, it was respected, but it wasn't really taken action towards until later. So this is kind of her overall point. It says that powerful idea is the recognition of our shared inheritance on this planet. We know more clearly than ever before that we carry common burdens, face common problems, and must respond with common action. So, for real world context, in 2001, President Bush attempted to ignore the Kyoto Global Warming Agreement that was put in place after Thatcher's speech, which said that they should start taking action on things like global warming and environmental change. So he tried to put timetables on the issue and whatnot because he said that there was a lack of scientific research. However, Thatcher had a degree in the scientific field, which was chemistry, and that made her a more reliable source regarding the issues because they're environmental, and she did the research and she presented it all to the UN, which also her speech was much earlier than what President Bush was trying to do in 2001. So she was just more reliable than President Bush would have been. And so if they would have taken action right away with what Thatcher said, then they wouldn't have had issues later with President Bush trying to veto the agreement. So one possible overall solution to too much bias and beliefs in real world issues is an unbiased third party on final decisions in the government. However, there will not always be someone available. Like, it might be hard to find somebody to always be an unbiased third party, and they also might not stay unbiased. But if it was possible, it would help take opinion out of taking big steps towards success. And another possible overall solution, mostly for the technology, is to stay in conversation with people of the same opinion as to restrain from conflict in the first place. And it's more logical than always having a third party. It seems like it's easy to catch on to, but you can't really tell people what to do and who to conversate with. And they can't really find common opinions unless they discuss them in the first place. Okay, that's it.
Okay, one question for you is, how did you select the strategies you used to gather information or conduct research, and were they effective?
Okay, can you say it one more time?
Yeah,
Sorry.
of course. How did you select the strategies you used to gather information or conduct research, and were they effective?
Okay. So I used mostly the databases that we learned about, the what's it called? Issues and controversies and opposing viewpoints and context. And then also if I used journalistic sources, I used one from the New York Times. I used the Raven system, which is figure out vested interest and what are some other ones? Oh, it's the neutrality and stuff too.
And do you feel like your strategies were effective?
Oh yes, I do. Because I think that even if they didn't directly correlate with what I was trying to say, I could manipulate them in a way that they did.
Okay. And then your second question is, explain the level of certainty you have about your conclusion, solution, or recommendation.
So my solutions kind of pertain to each lens that I talked about. So I feel like if I would have made them more general, I would be more certain about them. But they're specific to the lens, the first one with the government. So if that was implemented, I would be certain about it because it would make a lot of sense to have an unbiased third party, but like I said, it's not always logical to have one person like that, and they might not always stay unbiased.